Good morning. Thank you so much for being with me today, Teré, and thank you so much to the Fork Beans community members that are watching this asynchronously. Um, so I'd love just to introduce Teré Fowler-Chapman, who is a Black trans migrant by way of Sonoran Desert, by way of Bayou. As a creative practitioner and educator, he has worked with thousands of community members nationwide on centering the needs of LGBTQIA plus youth and adults in K-12 education, universities, nonprofit organizations, and prison industries. His work utilizes equitable practices and policies to liberate undersupported populations and foster social change. He is a National Arts Strategies Creative Community alumni, a member of the Marsha P. Institute's 2020 Cohort, and a Rocky Mountain Southwest Emmy nominee. You can find his work in the Huffington Post, University of Arizona's VOCA, TEDxTucson, Tucson Weekly, Arizona Public Media's PBS and NPR, and more. Teré is most recently the author of Moonshine, R&R Press, 2023. What? So Teré and I are also, I will just say, old friends that we got to know each other when we were both living back in Tucson. So now here we are. I find myself in Santa Cruz, California. You find yourself, are you currently in Denver,
Yeah,
Colorado?
yes.
Yeah. But we both also recently got to link up and share some hugs and share some catching up and share some readings from our books together just a few months ago. So it's been such a pleasure to reconnect with you, my friend.
Same, same. And that reading of yours is still like living live in my mind. So thank you so much for the opportunity. It was just,
Oh,
yeah, it was
yeah.
good.
Yeah. It was such a pleasure. I love this book. I like did not have to reach for it. It has been on my desk.
Aw,
Um, and I've just been really enjoying spending time with it. So it's a book that I'm continuing to engage with this summer, and I really love these poems. Thank you for putting them out in
aw,
the world.
thank you. That means a
Truly.
lot.
Okay, I admitted to you already that my challenge with these interviews has been keeping it to a reasonable time frame. So if you're comfortable, I will dive right into my first question.
Let's do it.
Okay, great. So just to get us started, if you would tell us a little bit more about your art making practice, what kinds of art you make, and what drew you to these art forms.
Yeah, well, the first one I think we should always acknowledge is poetry. That is probably like I found, yeah, right. We love poets. I found poetry actually through hip hop through Tupac Shakur.
Mhm.
He wrote a poetry book when he was 17 called A Rose That Grew from Concrete. And I always like knew him as a hip hop artist and thought it was like really cool that he had this like dual kind of identity where like, he was like very like conscious rap, but also could do like mainstream rap. But then I like was reading these poems that were like really soft, dainty, and vulnerable. And yeah, it just drew me in. Um, so that's I always feel like poetry is like the foundation of my art practice. And like just like looking in like for deeper meaning in like mundane things, I think is like the job of a poet. And then from there, I do collage work with found objects and like they can be anything, court documents all the way up to magazines, textbooks, just putting together different documents to create something deeper or something more beautiful. Particularly I like taking like angry images or like upsetting images and then putting them in a way that is more beautiful.
Oh, I love this. I love this practice of, sort of this reframing or recreating from the angry to the beautiful. What an incredible intention. Incredible
Thanks.
intention. I also so Tupac's book of poetry that you mentioned, the very first time I read it was on a beach in Santa Cruz, the first time I visited Santa Cruz. And this is like I had only ever been to Santa Cruz once before deciding to move here, right? And it was on that visit to Santa Cruz, I was visiting friends, sitting on the beach and reading Tupac's book of poetry. I have these like photographs of us sitting and engaging with this text. It's beautiful. It's such a great
Yeah,
collection.
I can't
Yeah.
believe he was only
So
17.
I know, seriously. It's amazing. Amazing to me. Okay. So my next question is just thinking about how you approach the experiment in your work.
Mhm.
And by experiment, I'd like to clarify. I don't necessarily mean experimental. I mean the experiment as a way that we engage in a way that feels like a new context, a new body, a new way of looking to us as individual artists, or any other way that you conceptualize the experiment, right? It doesn't have to be limited to experimental specifically, which I think has a different kind of context,
Mhm.
but really sort of the experiment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And
Hmm.
I was like so honored when you asked me because I was like, really, me experimental? Interesting. Yeah, like let's run with it. But then like the more that I was thinking about it, I was like, yeah, I guess. I think like experimentation comes up most that I don't believe, especially now in my work. I don't believe that like anything is like made like in error.
Mm,
So
hmm. Hmm.
specifically like if like my visual imagery, I think I give my like poems a little bit more grace. Like clearly if there's a grammatical structure error, I'm not like gonna argue with my editor. It's you have to be able to read it. So but in visually, like let's say that like, like I'm like using paint and I like do like accidentally like drip paint on like the canvas in an area that I wasn't expecting to. Instead of erasing it and getting a new piece of paper, I just work around it. Like it's there for a reason, that happened for a reason. And sometimes I've even like cut up a bunch of different images and textures and things like that and just went wham and just dropped it on a canvas and then really honored like where they land and then build stuff around them.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Mhm.
love this. I love this idea. I mean, it sounds to me like an oracular practice, right? It's sort of like happenstance, the divine,
Mhm.
something brought that drop to the page,
Right.
like through your hands. And then
Mhm.
it's like, this is how I would conceptualize what you're saying anyway. Right?
Yeah,
Like this
no.
idea of like respecting that, holding space
Yeah.
for that, and also thinking about like that drop on a canvas, if it's there intentionally and you're doing work around it, that allows for surprise, right? Allows for
Yeah.
surprise to come in. Yeah.
Yeah.
So so interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
And then what about autobiographical content in your work?
Yeah.
Like specifically, I know certainly with your poems, right, that you're drawing from autobiographical
Yeah.
experience. So can you tell us like how do you approach autobiography in your art making practices?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that like happenstance. I feel like humans, that's like what we are, right? We just like drop onto the planet and then people like work around us, depending on like how big or how small we get
Yes.
or our feelings get. But as far as like autobiographical or biographical, let me think. So first, like I think for me is like it's actually like very experimental, to tell the truth. For me, that to me is like a radical act of experimentation because for a very long time, I like identified that I wasn't really a good writer because people were just like really drawn to the way that I wrote poetry, but not what I was actually writing. And I kind of carried that like identity along for a long time and still I until I started playing with the truth. So in order to like, for instance, write Moonshine, like the first thing that I did was get out like a long sheet of butcher paper and do a timeline from the time that I was born all the way up until that moment that I like had decided to write that book. And there are poems that I've written in the past that like fit in on some of those like timeline moments. But then there were other poems that like there were moments that I had like never talked about or never wrote about. So what it did was it kind of gave me, and obviously I cannot fit all of that in one book, but it gave me like this blueprint to A, remember what happened, B, give myself permission to remember it as I remember it and just play with that truth. Whatever comes up, I guess it is kind of like the same as like the visual work, right? Like whatever comes up, it came up for a reason, so just write it down. As
Mm,
opposed to like trying to be um very like honest to others' truth.
mhm, mhm. Gosh, I that feels like such an invitation, like this invitation of taking your work off of the document taking your work out of the notebook and like allowing yourself permission to have a butcher block size piece of paper to
Mhm.
consider a new project. Like that just feels like such an invitation to offer to other writers and other art makers, you know, is like what happens if you step away from your most comfortable tool and give yourself a different scale or give
Mhm.
yourself, you know, like a different modality of thinking through a project. I thank you for sharing that. I love that.
Yeah,
And mhm. No,
it's
please.
actually like this big and like very long. And it's brown and
Mhm,
it's all crumpled up and there's like collage works like in between the
mhm.
years, like where I was just like, I don't know what this looks like poetically, but I know what it looks like visually. So I'm gonna do a little
Yeah.
collage for this dash. And it lives at the in the office of my old therapist. So it's up somewhere, the blueprint of moonshine somewhere up in her office, somewhere in Tucson.
Well, exists and also this is, I imagine, a source of inspiration for others who get to see that art object,
Mhm.
you know? Like, wow, what a gift for you to give your therapist.
Yeah, shout outs to Olivia. I think that she was like the and
Thanks, Olivia.
yeah, she was the one that like really pushed me to think beyond poetry and
Mhm.
beyond the words to use like expression. So yeah, she's great.
That's wonderful.
Mhm.
Okay. So I guess this is a if a question if it resonates. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about the experiment, we've talked a little bit about autobiography, and I think you've already talked a little bit about the intersection of those two things, sort of the experiment and autobiography. But specifically in the context, say talking about it being experimental to tell the truth. Yes. Like, I just want to say, yes, it is experimental to tell the truth, right? It's
Mm,
like when you find yourself at this point in your art making process where you allow yourself to be vulnerable, where you allow
mhm.
yourself to be truthful with yourself and with your audience. It's so scary and so remarkable and so generative, right? So I'm wondering if you could talk just a little bit more about that intersection of the experiment and autobiography, and perhaps if there's more to say about this concept of truth telling with the experiments.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like in hindsight, I'm like, oh, that's so rudimentary. Like, I have a hypothesis that if I tell the truth, I'm gonna get like I'm gonna have this reaction. I don't know, so I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna tell the truth and go through an experiment and see what happens, right? Like, so in that sense, I was like, duh, like why wasn't I like doing that before? But it is like, like with any experiment, it's doing it without knowing necessarily what the outcome is. I think that like leaning in to experimentation means like leaning into the unknown fearlessly. And that's, that is the foundation of experimentation. And so giving yourself permission, some of the best poems that I've read have been when people are like telling stories about the things that no one talks about. Those are like
Mm-hmm.
the ones that like really stick with me. But then I found myself in my writing like not wanting to do that, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
like I don't want to talk about the things like I don't want to talk about like addiction. I don't want to talk about like, I don't want to talk about those things. I want to like keep it like very surface level. And I noticed that like I would use the word you a lot. So in like my earlier poems, everything was like you. I'm writing for you. I'm doing this for
Mm-hmm.
you. And then when I flipped that and started writing from
Mm-hmm.
that's like to me like where the experimentation like began, like where it's like, yes, you as the reader, but I have actually never written a poem for myself before. So how do
Mm-hmm.
I show up? And so writing a lot of poems from I and then, letting them breathe. I always say like, I don't know, I like they go take a break, they go take a nap for years. I don't know, for sometimes for months, sometimes for a
Uh-huh.
day. And then
Sure.
I wake them up and I'm like, good morning. And then, maybe there is a you that belongs there. But either way, giving them that time to be just for me first, as opposed to trying to write
Mm.
and control an audience's reaction. I think that that is also like very like experimentative. It's like thinking I sometimes would write and assume the way that like would try to manipulate the audience's reaction basically. I mean, if I'm being honest,
Mhm.
right? So I was trying
Mhm.
to control their emotions, whereas now, the truth is just the truth. I don't
Mhm.
actually know what's going to happen after I read this poem out loud, and that's actually not my responsibility. It's just an experiment. I'm just here
Yeah.
giving you the poem.
You know, I feel like not only did you just share this incredible concept of leading into the unknown fearlessly, but you also just provided a blueprint on how to do it, which I'm so grateful for. You know, like this idea of like, and then here's how you do it, right? And it's actually not trying to control reaction. It's actually just speaking from my truth, making sure I'm writing for myself, and then potentially allowing a you to come in after that. Maybe,
Mhm.
right? If I
Right.
decide. That's such a beautiful blueprint on how to like lean in fearlessly to the truth. So thank you for that.
Of course.
Um, and I just have one final question, Teray, which is, you know, if anyone comes to mind, I'm just wondering if there's a couple of artists that you admire for that you can identify that are working with experiments in autobiography in some way, shape, or form. And it doesn't have to be someone who's currently working. It can be somebody in literary lineage that feels really, you know, impactful, or it can be somebody that's creating today. But just like anybody that you are inspired by these days who's working in this autobiographical experiment.
Yeah, well, I have to share the coolest thing that I have seen probably in the last 2 years was on a retreat, where poet Marshall Green, we were sitting in a room. We were supposed to be doing icebreakers about like our journey,
Hmm.
our gender journey. That's what it was, our gender
Hmm.
journey. So once again, working with butcher paper, blowing that idea up that we're not confined to that 8 by 10, whatever it is, 8 by 11.5. I don't know. We're not confined to that. You can use anything. You can use a wall. Poets can do murals. Poets can do anything. And so we had this like larger piece of paper. And I remember like I drew like some brain and like did like this left, right side, and I was like really into my head, like not knowing how to do it. Marshall literally just like listed all of the nicknames that they've ever been called from the time that they were born all the way up until that moment. And then at the end just put what did they put? Rewind, rinse, repeat.
Oh,
It's like that is the gender like what? Like
yes.
blew my mind. And then it was just like,
Yes.
oh my gosh, like, yeah, like a gender journey is like for some people, like going from like baby girl to like T to this to that. And
Mm-hmm.
to now, like that's so true. And it was just so beautiful. The most beautiful thing, and I'm sure I don't even know where it is. It's probably, I just thought it was the most beautiful thing. I just remember it being kind of tossed in the back of a truck. Who knows where that piece of paper is, but it
Right.
was so cool.
May it end up on a therapist's office to inspire others,
Maybe,
please.
right?
Yes.
I know.
Gosh,
I'm
that's
not
so
Jackson.
beautiful.
Isn't that? It was just like the
Yes.
most inspirational thing I've seen in like probably like the last couple of years. Um, and then I'm really like, I guess like inspired by like Jean-Michel Basquiat. I've been like really invested in past and future. So not so much like specific artists, but like Jean-Michel Basquiat, obviously my wife's an amazing writer, so Yvette. Um she really like has this like really like unique way of looking at journalism that like breaks the rules that I think is really cool. And in the future, I think that the most inspiring thing that I'm leaning on for inspiration right now is my students,
Mm,
ironically. Like, yeah, I'm finding
yes.
poetry in places where there's not like too many poets, which is like a really bizarre, unexpected, beautiful thing. These people are so poetic, just walking around and like the way that they approach life and the questions that they ask, and the things that they don't accept, and then
Hmm.
the areas where they give grace, and then the areas where they are like, I don't even know what grace is in that moment, right? And like,
Hmm.
like just like watching them like grow and like fall and stand up again and fall and crawl and learn how to walk and then learn how to run. It is just so beautiful to watch. And so my biggest inspirations right now are coming from that group, and then my community and recovery group, that exact
Hmm.
same model of I don't know where to give grace. I don't know how to stand up. I don't know how to crawl. And the next thing you know, they're walking and then they're running. And they're trying different things. That to me is like really poetic. And then of course, like the Butcher Block, Green, all of that kind of compiled together with some past artists, is where I'm at.
Yes. I love all of that. And I feel like I feel like you just shared something, Teray, that is maybe the essence of the autobiographical experiment, which is like, I don't know, but I'm going to give it a try. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I don't know how to crawl. I don't know how to walk. I don't know how to do any of that. But like, I'm going to take this first shift forward and see what happens after that.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
That's also like leaning into the unknown fearlessly. Right? Woo,
Yeah. And that
so
like
much.
yeah, and like not like I even think about like my own past experiences. Like not every move was I my definition for intentionality has changed over time, but like not every when I look back, not every move was intentional, but every move had a purpose. And
Hmm.
none of it was like not on purpose, right? And so like I wouldn't be who I was today with the grace and the compassion that I have today if I wasn't who I was then. And so like, babies are not like doing anything wrong when they fall. They're just gathering data to like really learn how to stand. And
Hmm.
so that's like, just a big part of my work right now.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today and for sharing your insights and your own observations about your work and others on these topics. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. This is such a cool concept. Y'all are brilliant. I just love, seriously,
Thanks.
like I always think about, I'm like, who are the people that create new ideas on Google? It's you. Appreciate it. Like, like who's generating these like new ways to approach education? It's you. I love it. So
Oh, thanks.
going
Well,
because
I mean, same. I will say the same back in your direction. It's like before we got on here for this recorded part of the interview, we were talking about how much inspiration we both take from the people,
Mhm.
the students we work with, the young people, the youth that we work with. I find so much inspiration. I just want to keep doing better for all of us. I just want to
Yeah,
keep doing better. Like, how do we make this better?
yeah,
Is always like a question.
I
So
love
thanks
that.
for saying that.
Of course, it's just the truth.